All right. Well, hi, hello, and welcome to Accelerate the Path to Zero Trust with Dell and Gigamon. Today's exciting webinar is sponsored by Gigamon and their special guest Dell and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Jess Steinbach. I'm with Actual Tech Media, a future B2B company, and I am so happy that I get to be your moderator for this conversation today because we are going to have such a fun and interactive conversation. I love days like today when I get to join right in with you. I have lots of burning questions. I am such a zero trust fan. And today I've got two expert presenters here with me who are going to answer all of our burning zero trust questions, right? We're going to get into the how, we're going to get into the why, and most importantly, we're going to get into the why now. All of the important zero trust ideas, the trends, what you need to know. I cannot wait to kick things off. So I'm going to zip through a few of our housekeeping points, and then we can get this show on the road and spend as much time with our wonderful speakers as we possibly can. Let's take a little bit of a tour. We're going to walk through, take a stroll through your audience console together today. I'm going to start things out in our questions tab because this is the best place to get interactive and get involved. And as I said, our speakers want to be interacting with you. We want to have a little bit more of a free-flowing conversation today, so we want to hear your questions. Give it a little test run right now. Give us a little hi, give us a hello, let us know how your day is going. I see you, Tony and Morteza. Hey, Morteza, great to see you again. And Melissa and Gilbert and Vrej. We got a whole awesome crew here with us. Keep those highs and hellos coming in. We want to hear from you as we go through our day together today. Now, if you do have any technical issues today, here's your step one. Step one, browser refresh. Browser refresh is going to clear out any of the usual gremlins. But if somebody definitely fed them after midnight, which happens from time to time, I don't know who's doing that, but it just does seem to be one of those days. If the gremlins are getting in the system and the browser refresh is not clearing them out, you can post a message in that questions window and our team will be there to help you out. All right, so that was the questions tab. Now we're going to move one tab over because I want to make sure you all spend some time exploring the handouts tab. There are some great takeaways and follow-ups to the conversation that we're about to have. I promise you will want to spend some time exploring those. So make sure you've got those handout tabs open and ready and saved for after we wrap up the webinar today. All right, so questions, handouts, you know what's next. We're going to talk about prizes. So today on the webinar, we have a $250 Amazon gift card that is available as a prize drawing at the end of our webinar. So you do need to be here in live attendance in order to qualify to win that prize, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you are not sure what those T's and C's are, no problem. We have them listed for you back in that handouts tab where we were just hanging out. So head on back over there, click in, scroll down, and you will find the full terms and conditions waiting for you there. Now, if that one prize was not exciting enough for you, how about we'll throw in a second one? We have a best question gift card here available to all of you, anyone who meets those T's and C's, just by asking a question. So if you have that burning question that's rolling around in your head that you've always been wanting to ask about zero trust, now is the time, because not only are we going to have a fun interactive conversation about it, but you are also entered to win that best question giveaway, and that's a $50 Amazon gift card. What we will do is review all the questions asked during the entire webinar, and then we will follow up with that best question. So even if you ask a question today that we are not able to answer in our live Q&A, you are still entered to win. So be sure you're getting those questions in as we go through our session. Okay, well, that is it for the housekeeping. We've covered a lot of information very quickly, but I would like to bring our incredible speakers on out here with me now because I am very excited to get into this conversation and we've got a lot to explore. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to Michael Dickman, Chief Product and Development Officer at Gigamon, and Herb Kelsey, Project Fort Zero Lead at Dell. Herb and Michael, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Absolutely.
Well, we've got a lot to cover. And Herb, I asked if I could start out with you with maybe a little bit of, I don't know if level set is the right word, maybe some of the basics, right? Just jumping in at the foundation of zero trust, because this is a really big idea. And I think that there's some confusion about zero trust. Is it a checklist? Is it an approach? Is it a strategy? And how we're kind of walking into the conversation today. So Herb, can you start us out with why is zero trust important to you and to the folks that are here in the audience today. Why should we care?
That's a great question. So I think that the reason that we care is because we all operate in an environment that's very interconnected by networks, and we flow data and applications and personal information across this network. And so our real interest is in securing what happens to that information. And it turns out that zero trust as an architecture and an approach to secure building a system that is secured by design is an appropriate one to use, right? So it's not to say that there aren't other ways to secure your data or your networks. It's not to say that it's the only approach, but it is a comprehensive approach that meets a lot of the objectives that people have. That's in general. I think why it's important to the US government and governments around the world is because they have a higher standard of care for the data. They classify the information. They want to make sure that they're protecting their nation state. And I think they have very specific objectives of saying that they do not want somebody to come into the system and misuse and abuse data or pull it out. They want to make sure that those users don't travel into other areas of the environment across the network that they shouldn't, and they want to make sure that they don't escalate their privileges to get even further into the system than they should. And so those are the reasons why I think it's important for Dell, and I think for our ecosystem partners, it's an opportunity to actually meet the needs of our customers, and that's ultimately where we get value and create value.
If I could just add to that, I totally agree, Herb, with all those comments. I would say the other thing that I personally like really resonated with me about zero trust originally was that idea of it's not about building a better and better and better perimeter and making sure you can guarantee nothing bad ever happens. It's around more of a realistic, pragmatic approach. And that's where I think, world events and everything that we've seen in cybersecurity for years has proven that yes, we need to reduce the attack surface, but we need to do that knowing that there will still be issues and to have an architecture that actually plans for that in a holistic way. And I know that you've done some great leadership there at Dell, and there's a lot of other organizations that have helped there too. But in terms of the why, Jessica, I think it's more of like a realistic approach to the world that we're living in. And I know zero trust, and I know we'll get into this, is potentially a big undertaking and a long journey. But it's around recognizing the reality of the challenges we face versus saying, hey, here's a silver bullet, now we're safe. It's more around what do we need to do today, tomorrow, knowing that it's a dynamic world to be protected.
Yeah, and then the comment that I would make is when you talk about just securing the perimeter of your environment, you're not really taking into account what happens. Attackers gain credentials to get into your system. So once they're in their system, if you've made it frictionless, if you've made it so that you've got easy access to all components of your enterprise or environment, the attacker gets that benefit, right? And so it's a recognition, and the way it's a recognition that you can't just allow for free movement within your enterprise or your command. And the example that I use when I'm talking to customers is if you come into a hotel and you have the choice between a hotel that checks your credentials at the desk, gives you a key card. When you go to the elevator, you use that key card to punch just the floor that you're on. You use that then to get into your room, and oh, by the way, there's a safe as well, versus a hotel that just says the front doors are open. Once you're in, there are no doors on the hotel rooms. Go where you want. And that's really the environment and mentality that we have to get away from, because our attackers gain credentials. They gain all the privileges of someone who is supposed to be in the system. And if you then allow free reign, your ability to protect your data and your applications is very low.
I love that analogy. That's really sticking in my head, Herb. That because I do think that hopefully now most people are sort of on board with the idea of zero trust, and but I think there's still a little bit of discomfort around the zero trust of it, and sometimes that can feel a little odd to say, well, are you saying you don't trust your employees? Well, kind of, but also what you're saying is that analogy of kind of thinking of it as a hotel and where would you feel comfortable, that we have places in our lives that we understand that there needs to be a gate and then a gate and then a gate, and that not everyone needs access to your hotel room, but they might need access to the fitness center, and that's fine.
Correct. And then, actually then the segue is that's where you can explain to customers that strange term called policy decision and enforcement points. That's what that means. When I get to my hotel elevator, the fact that I can only card it to get to my floor is protecting me from, other elements. And it's just a decision point, an enforcement point that's reasonable. And the
Mm.
real trick becomes how much friction is that really in my life versus the protection that I have um, from having to swipe my key each time. And I think that can be an argument, but at some level, it makes sense that you don't just have free reign once you're given initial credentials, which is very much how a lot of environments operate today.
I do want to come
Something
back
else
to
that
that. Oh, sorry, go ahead,
sorry,
Michael.
Jessica. Yeah, I just want to add one other thing because it's a fun analogy in a way, right? So the other thing I would say we also have to think about is what happens if someone steals your hotel key card, right? And then
Right.
that introduces
So,
a whole other suite of kind of controls on top of that. So like taking
well,
the analogy
yeah.
that way, you're
So,
like, wait a minute, I can't even
so,
trust that.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so there are a couple of things then we can pick up on that. What's nice about the key cards, at least the ones that I get, it doesn't have my room number or my floor number on it, right? So there's a disassociation from the credential itself to what it accesses, right? And so the wonderful thing is if I lose access to that key card, it doesn't give somebody free reign just because they have it, because they don't know where they're supposed to go. The second thing that I would say is because it's a credential, I can go down and get it replaced. I can re-authenticate myself. I bring my ID back. That one gets disabled and the new one becomes enabled. The place where I thought you were going are places where what do you do with privileged users? What do you do with the staff that can roam the building? Well, I think that, if you have that policy in place, you can just have your staff be restricted to certain floors and not the entire hotel. You can have, but you certainly have a higher degree of scrutiny before you give somebody reign of all of those floors. So, I agree with you. Losing your credentials in that case you know, has some issues. One of the nice things about an advanced zero trust environment is that part of that credentialing is biometric. And so in
Mm.
that case, losing the physical credential doesn't allow somebody to make complete use of that credential. So again, there are layers, but the reason I like the analogy is because it takes the point that Michael was making, which is that zero trust moves you away from just focusing on the perimeter activity and causes you to have to support the movement of individuals that are inside the environment already. And that's critical. That's where a lot of breaches come from. It turns out that people with high level credentials, administrative credentials, are ones that exploit the system. And you want to be able to protect against that.
Well, I like this analogy for many reasons, and I have a few things that I want to come back to with what you've just brought up. In particular, I definitely want to come back to that balance between friction and security, and talk a little bit more about that because I think that comes up quite a bit. But I just have to say before I move on to my next question, I one of the things that I really love about this question is I think something that I've heard come up quite a bit recently around AI is the democratization of the conversation in technology. I think that ransomware, phishing, and AI are crossing boundaries between those of us in the tech world and those of us in our personal lives. And people who don't necessarily work in the industry. And I think our audience here with us today is a pretty highly technical audience. And so we're going to get into the tech side of it. But it's hopefully all of us at some point or another are having conversations with people in our lives where we're needing to explain or justify decisions or make business cases to people that are not in the tech space. And I think it really helps to have an analogy like a hotel, which we can all understand and relate to, and everyone has had that experience, and bringing that to them in a way that says, that isn't using jargon and isn't using a bunch of technical terms. I think that's a really important tool to have in your tool chest. So I hope everyone kind of tucked that away in their brain. I think this is a very deep and effective analogy that Herb and Michael have given us already in our first opening minutes of the conversation to take back to your team. So I really appreciate that. Herb, if I can throw another sort of nuanced question at you about this, you have been talking a little bit, giving us a little bit of an intro into why Zero Trust. I think that we're hearing Zero Trust has been around. It's not new, but it does seem to be more and more in kind of common parlance. It does seem to be something that we're seeing more and more enterprises and organizations adopting and thinking about. Why do you think that this is taking off now? What is there an urgency behind why this is top of mind for more and more people?
I think so. I think that the evolution of Zero Trust came about through technologists expanding what was a network concept more broadly. I think that was true. I think the fact that the United States of America put it forward as their security construct in 2021 made a difference. I think that the US DoD publishing an architecture for implementing Zero Trust really made it something that could be adopted, because now there was an approach that was endorsed by a very large organization on behalf of a very large country. So, I mean, that's the momentum that I've seen. I've been in NATO, I've been on almost every continent talking to people that are interested, and they all point to the publishing, they all point to the executive order from the United States and or the publishing of that architecture. So I think that made it something that could be built. I think that the urgency that I'm seeing for Zero Trust is multifold from customers, and I'm interested in what Michael is hearing from his customer set. The key things that I'm hearing are we have to be able to trust the data that we're using, whether that's a warfighter or that's a senior executive or an operations person. If you go from industry to industry across, especially critical infrastructure, that's a huge concern. In healthcare, we've seen the breaches. In financial, we've seen the breaches. Telecom, we've seen the breaches. Energy sector. So that's a growing and growing concern because it's having business impact. I can't process healthcare claims. I can't keep my energy environment online to produce revenue. And so I think that's one. I think there are two other drivers that I'm seeing. The other one is AI. And I think that the reason that we're seeing it in AI is because that's a situation where most of the organizations that are looking to either build or use models realize that that's a high value asset. It's not questionable, and it's not customer data, which ultimately is not, which is not the company's IP. But those AI models are the company's intellectual property. It's the most concentrated understanding of what their customers believe or how those customers interact with the company. And so they want to protect that. The third thing that I'm seeing, which is maybe the biggest driver, is just the idea of sovereignty. Around the world, we have different views of data protection or data privacy. But we have multinational companies that have to operate in those environments. And we have governments and industries that want to protect their data, not just technically, but also from legal interaction as well. And so when you start seeing the risks go up, you start seeing your value in your data getting higher with AI, and you have a desire to operate within your company, within your framework of laws, and have sovereign capability. I think that's driving a lot of what I'm seeing when we talk to our customers and potential customers. Michael, are
Yeah,
you seeing something similar? Are you seeing AI starting to drive more conversations about how do I protect my network?
yeah, AI is obviously the the topic du jour for sure. So yeah, I can touch on that a little bit, and then I do want to go back to something else you said as well. Yeah, on the AI side, I do see a lot of customers jumping into it very quickly, driven by maybe even the business case isn't quite there, but it's like jumping into adopt it in some form or fashion. And with that speed, I do think there's some new risks, right, through lack of understanding about how and where data is stored and used. And I think we're all familiar with the risk of, someone doesn't realize that a particular data source is informing an AI, and then that data can be leaked in an unintentional way. And then you have other issues like the other direction with data poisoning, right, which is where you can manipulate an AI to give a certain type of predetermined answer, in a wrong and manipulative, harmful way. So yes, I do think that AI security is going to become increasingly top of mind as it gets rolled out. Um, and just like in my own world, right, for our company, before we jump in, we have to ask, well, wait a minute, if we can't put our source code or our company's most important IP in a public cloud that someone else has access to, and you would think like, hey, that's a solved problem, but actually those things do have to be double and triple checked these days, right? So absolutely, that's important, and so having visibility to where the data is, but also not just kind of like a broader version of zero trust, but zero trust even on the policy. Like just because you have a policy doesn't mean it's happening. And so being able to track where is data coming from and where is it going in reality, not just intention, is important. So yeah, the AI thing, 100%. I did also want to go back. You said trust the data you're using. I think that's just really critical. And if we think specifically about cybersecurity, there is a risk, right, of certain events or breaches or compromises where the adversaries will cover their tracks, right? So that's not hopefully not a surprise to anybody. And the way those tracks are covered will include disabling logs or manipulating logs. And so the question is, so what can I rely on? And it has to be multiple sources and there has to be triangulation. But one of the pieces that I think is critical is data in motion, right? That's what's actually traversing the network, who's actually communicating with whom, where is data moving, and to have that visibility, that is something that can be trusted. And so the idea of I'm going to have an endpoint view, I'm going to have a data storage view, and all that is essential. But you also want to know what's really happening, which you can only get from a network perspective. And so that trust point is, kind of in zero trust, what can you trust? And it's what is actually happening that you can directly observe. And then, Jess, if I may, just even two other things to add on what Herb said, because this is such an urgent area, and I just really, as you can see, have some passion on this. But two things I think just to add an addition is number one, operational technology, and number two, compliance. So, Herb, I know you mentioned critical infrastructure, but I do just want to double down on that one. Recently, I was just in London actually with our own customer advisory board, and there were some companies like, I don't know if we consider critical infrastructure or not, as manufacturing of steel and a logistics company. They think of themselves as critical infrastructure, and they have a huge amount of operational technology. And even though OT maybe sounds new and hip, in many cases, these are 20, 30, 40-year-old systems that are being connected to the internet for the first time, and they do not have security stacks. And you cannot deploy endpoint protection. And that is now part of our world.
That's right.
And we must find ways to monitor and secure those not only like end devices, but those systems that they control. And that, again, is an area where data in motion and what's really happening is essential. And then last but not least, on the compliance side, I do think zero trust, and this one I won't go into detail yet. We'll see if there's kind of interest here from the panel and questions. Zero trust can actually help compliance. this goes back to your friction versus ease. There's some things that everybody has to do. I think in many ways, customers will find as they go down the zero trust journey, compliance will be eased. And so there's also even that question of not only end user friction, but how much burden is on IT and security for other things. Zero trust can actually ease compliance. And so there's just so many reasons and benefits to go down this journey.
Okay, so let's keep this going. So a couple things on the OT side, what 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 we've done in terms of supporting the architecture is that we've made sure that we require an identity for API to API conversations. We require a cryptographic identity for machine to machine conversations. And what we've demonstrated is the ability, we can't get to the end device because sometimes that device is a robot or something very, um, not very sophisticated. It's a sensor or a robot, fine. But they do come back to a PLC, a logic controller that does govern their activity. Well, even if that's a 30 or 40-year-old piece of equipment, generally that logic controller is going to be outfitted with the API to talk to the rest of its world and environment. That's where we pick up the security. So we secure that connection, and then we monitor the traffic, as you were mentioning. So that's kind of comment on one of the things that you said. On the other that you said where you were referencing compliance, I think that, so I'll use the term, it's continuous authority to operate, but think of it as drift. If I have a iPhone and my teenagers have access to it, the settings are going to change. It's going to drift away from where I expect it to be. It's just going to happen. Hey, can you help me get on here? Yeah, but I'm going to change your Spotify setting too. And I'm like, well, why'd you do that? So it's going to drift away. Within these zero trust systems, we have an opportunity to provide a status of where the system is in retrospect to where it was as it was delivered, right? So if we deliver it as a secure environment, as those settings change, we can actually measure that. And we could actually say that if you get too far away, we're going to stop letting you get access to certain kinds of data until you turn the dials back up and make us more secure. Now, that seems a little esoteric, and Michael, I kind of agree with you, compliance isn't where people think, but what I can tell you is that ability is one of the things that gets the senior leadership in enterprises the most excited, because it gives them near real time, I don't want to use the term near real time visibility on the risk in their environment. And that's something that's important to them because they want to make affirmative decisions about that. So if a portion of your system's being attacked or compromised and you're starting to make changes and you want to start isolating that, what's the rest of your system look like? Right? And that's something that's important. Or if I'm only doing audits every year or so, what's the status of the system in between? Or how expensive is it for me to try and do a manual audit of the system? And will it suffice for me to just run? So we do these things today. We do penetration tests and evaluation tests in general, but it has been critical, and there are funded projects that are looking at how, in fact, do we assess the quality of the status of the system from a compliance standpoint whenever we want to, and then what decisions do we make based on that? So you're absolutely right. That is one of the things that resonates with the senior leadership of the customers that we've been interacting with.
And we know this, right? That visibility and speed and accuracy are really affecting the CISO's role, and kind of how this is playing out in terms of burnout is one of the things we hear a lot from teams. So, this is a big element. And what I'm kind of hearing from you guys as we're going through this, we started talking about why the urgency, and then jumped into, because you guys are solution driven and I love it, and passionate, as Michael said, you're already solving the urgencies. And so what I'm kind of hearing form is like a best practice list. What are the elements that the audience should be considering if they want to feel like they have a successful zero trust approach in their organization? And so maybe what I'm going to ask you guys to do is in some ways kind of recap or pull out from this conversation that we've had, if there was that sort of best practice, print list. And I know that zero trust is not a checklist and it is not a one size fits all. But if you were giving some sort of key components that the audience should have in mind when they're evaluating their existing zero trust, or if they're considering implementing. And Herb, maybe I can ask you to start us out with that.
Yeah. So, you asked a great question. It has a couple of elements to it. I'm going to just pick one. What I would say is that if you're embarking on implementing zero trust, pick an architecture. Don't avoid doing that, because it's the architecture that's going to give you the framework for a successful implementation. So that's one. The second thing that I would say is a pitfall that I see happen often, and it happens at two levels. One level is that customers will try and implement just one pillar of zero trust at a time. So one of the examples that I use is, if you work on your user pillar and identity and you haven't already segmented your network or already protected your data, all you've done is make it easier for people to come in to your environment and have free reign through everything. And we've had some customers that have done that, been breached, and seen the blast radius or the scope of effect within their organization grow tremendously. So be very careful about one pillar at a time. What I would recommend, and what I know the US DoD recommends, is that you have to make sure that you go across the pillars and integrate and mature the integrations. So that kind of leads me to kind of the third practice. When you add capability into your environment, you have to integrate it with everything else. In other words, what I see often is that somebody brings in a tool and just drops it into the environment and say, I've improved based on the capability this tool provides. But no, you have to integrate it with the other tools in the environment. And sometimes that's seen as a separate project. Sometimes that's not considered at all. But I would urge people to, in a sense, integrate as you go. And then the last point that I would make is, as we looked at the requirements for implementing a zero trust environment, we identified just as many organizational requirements as there were technical requirements. And so what that means is that the organization has choices to make. They have policies and procedures to enact. They have decisions to make about how they're going to go about certain aspects of their zero trust journey. And so I would say, don't neglect the organizational framework for identifying users, identifying devices, determining who gets privileged access, determining what procedures you want about somebody getting elevated privileges, making decisions about what you're going to automate. When is somebody's behavior on the system so bad that they should be kicked off? When is a user's behavior on the system so bad that you disable their user account? These are policy decisions that organizations need to make to be effective. And I would just highlight that there are policy and procedure questions that have to be addressed by the enterprise. And then I think you're on a journey to a successful implementation.
Yeah, I agree, Herb, with those key points. And then just going back to your question, I will say I do see some customers saying, "Here's a checklist of 3 items," and then maybe I'm not done, but I'm like good enough. And an MFA is one of those items, EDR is one of those items, and then there may be a couple others. And I agree with Herb that you kind of pick off one pillar and you modernize the tool that's associated with that pillar is a good thing. I mean, it's definitely a good thing. But if you have MFA and then obviously that can still be compromised, as we all know, and nothing else has been done, then you actually aren't any better. So I agree with that 100%. I do think there's a value to a checklist on steps to take, maybe not
Yeah,
tools to adopt, and doing that in a thoughtful order. And Herb talked about having an architecture. Agreed. I think that architecture may not be identical for every organization. And so different organizations may have different attack services that they need to worry about. They may have different typical transaction flows. They may have different budgets, right? So some of our customers may be smaller and a low margin industry, and they are predominantly on premise. Some customers may have a very large budget, for security and other things. They're a large company, and they are in multiple public clouds as well as private cloud and data center, and that's going to be different. And so to go through that process of defining that protect surface, if you will, and then mapping what are the transaction flows and what do I need to watch, and then choosing the architecture is important because it won't be one size fits all. I'm sure we'd all agree on that. And then the last piece I would add on the zero trust policies, where I do think that there's a lot of that organizational question, what policies should we have? Going back to where I opened the conversation about being pragmatic, there's going to be a lot of cases where people don't finish that process or the policies are a little bit more coarse grained than they should be. And the zero trust architecture should be resilient to that. So, sometimes you have a micro segment that includes thousands of people, or something like that. It's not really micro. And so you maybe have the technology to support it, but it's not real. And so you need to have that ability to monitor, maintain, secure, detect, no matter how good the policies are in practice, because that's always going to be a journey. And we can count in general on those policies always being a little bit behind where they should be.
yep. And so I agree. The way that I liken it, and I go back to iPhones quite a bit in my analogies. Hotels and iPhones. You can tell kind of how I move in the world. Um, when you get an iPhone, it has a whole set of default settings, and that's fine, and it's operable. You can text with it, and oh my goodness, you can make a call with it, which I find teenagers, they're like, how do I get in touch with them? Well, the thing you're holding is a phone. You can dial that number, but we won't worry about that. Um, but over time, you realize, you say, oh, wow, what's this focus feature? Oh, you mean I can actually have the phone not ring and not get that call at dinner? And I can set it up so I only get calls ring through from this person. You adapt the policy decisions and procedures as you go. And I think that is a good way to think about the differences between organizations. I think you come in with a set of defaults. As you learn about your environment, as you learn about quote this new zero trust thing, or what points of friction are good or not. So I'll give you an example. Within our environment, you can get to a great many of applications within our user space. Is it the customer's policy to have us request your credentials every time you open an application? Or is once enough? Or are there specific applications that you want to better protect? That's fine. Those are decisions. And guess what? Those are decisions you can make over time. A lack of that decision doesn't really increase your risk profile. But I'm going to make a comment that I think is going to make Michael happy. The one place where I think you can start, and we've seen customers do this, we've done it ourselves internally. You've got to get the logging right. You've got to get your ability to observe the environment right as a baseline capability. And to me, that's where you can't go wrong, because you haven't exposed your environment in any way, but what you have done is you're starting to understand your environment in a better way. And so, for us, the most complex subsystem that we built was our logging and analytics and essentially observability environment, so that it was uniform. Why do you want it uniform? So you can build advanced analytics on top of it, so you can take automated action. But if you don't have that visibility, you you can't you can't frustrate the adversary in any way, shape, or form. As we went through our um, cybersecurity assessments, what we found surprised the attackers was how visible they were on our network when they are used to being invisible on the network. And part of that is what we do with Gigamon, and part of that is why they've been such a good partner for us. So, Michael, let you kind of pick that mantle up. That's called a softball down the middle, but please pick that up, because that's what we need you for, at enterprise speeds, at data center scale, to help us build that out.
Yeah, thanks, Herb. That does make me happy. So thank you for that.
That's what we're here
Um,
for, Michael.
that's right. But
I live for
more
this.
important than my happiness, right, is I think you hit on something that I really believe is the case. Yeah, how do you get that solid ground to stand on, and something that helps you ongoing? And you're exactly right. When you think about what is the current state, where do we need certain sensors, detections, tools, right? Having that ability to observe what is happening, really happening with data in motion, is how you do that. And then as you go into those, pen tests, red team exercises, um, the adversaries will get in somewhere, right, eventually. And then being able to spot them quickly, as you said earlier, in near real time is essential. And so, our mission at Gigamon when it comes to zero trust is to provide those capabilities, that baseline ability to observe everything that's happening in the environment through data in motion, through network traffic, and then to accelerate, time to identify those issues. And actually, I will just bring up one picture. Maybe if the audience will permit a third analogy, we got hotel, we got iPhone. So this is one that comes from Forrester, but I kind of like this one, which is, you've got a dark street or a dark park or something, and one of the challenges, and there's this sort of like old joke, I guess, where you're kind of looking for your keys, and someone's looking for the keys under the street light. And the cop says, "Oh, did you lose your keys under the street light?" And the guy says, "No, I lost it over there in the dark, but I can't see over there, so I'm looking here." Right? And it just doesn't make sense. And so you need to have that ability to not specifically, not structurally allow adversaries places to hide with blind spots. And the network is where you illuminate those blind spots. And being able to see all the traffic is lighting up the street, if you will. And that goes back to, Herb, you talked about it is a big challenge to say how and where do we get visibility, where do we do logging of which type, and so on. And this is really a mission of the company is to provide that. And so we call that, or we think about that, as deep observability, right? If you kind of go back to what is observability, it's being able to observe what's happening without interfering with the system. So we don't say you got to change your application or you got to sign up to this service. It's as things are to observe. And then the depth that we provide is that granularity and completeness that only comes from the network. So it's not only logs of what this device sees or what that application claims, which is useful, but it is a complete view with the depth of network visibility that you can click down in as much granularity as you want. And so, yeah, that is
So,
definitely a point of passion for
so,
us. Yeah,
so
Herb, you want to
Michael,
jump in?
yeah, I want to do two things. I want to talk. There's a question here that says, "What makes Gigamon Zero Trust Solutions better than other competitors?" And I don't know that I can answer that, but I can talk about why we selected Gigamon to be part of this environment. One was the capacity and the scale at which you can look at traffic, and that's huge because we have very high volumes flowing through. So that was one differentiator for us. Um, Core capability, deduplication of network packets, all these wonderful things that you do fine. That was great. but it was also the fact that it was it was easy to integrate Gigamon into all the other touch points that we have within the system. And so, one of the things that people worry about is how hard is it to integrate these environments? Well, one of the benefits of working with Gigamon was the ease with which we could integrate um, Gigamon's capabilities into the rest of our environment downstream and upstream. So hopefully that kind of addresses question 21, but also just talks about what the value proposition has to be for a capability. You have to do your job, you have to do it at speed and high scale, you have to provide full capability set, and you have to be able to integrate with others in order to play nicely in a zero trust environment. And Gigamon
Yeah, very,
to get for us.
yeah, very true, right? So you talked about scale and integration. We've invested quite a lot in those areas. And so scale, we support, some of the largest service provider networks in the world, which stresses us on scale that way. But we also support some of the most complex networks in the world, not just scale, but scale of traffic, but scale of diversity of different environments. And so we've definitely been stressed in those directions and have invested a lot there. And then on the integration point, yeah, I mean, this is a multi-vendor world and it is a world of solutions. And so definitely we need to have validated, and this is what we do, validated integrations with everything from network detection and response to web application firewall to packet capture to SIM to everything, and making that work. And then just to, I guess, complete an answer to that question, I'll add a third thing around an advantage that we've built at Gigamon is to cover all environments with a consistent single approach. And so we cover physical networks, virtualized and containerized networks, and we cover that in the public cloud as well, right? So let's say you're using native cloud services in AWS, covered, including things like GovCloud and so on. Or let's say you're using a VMware environment, but now you're looking at Nutanix or Red Hat OpenShift, covered. And I think that ability to not say I need a siloed approach by infrastructure, but I can have that consistent view everywhere is a big advantage of where we've invested and what we've done.
Well, there's another component that you didn't talk about that I'd ask you to, which is that when you're in a zero trust environment and you are dynamically creating network segments for the sake of security, that's something else that Gigamon has to be able to support for us. Is the fact that we are, spinning up and tearing down software-defined networks at all times, and that's another area that Gigamon supports for us. That's been critical.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's a good call out. Appreciate that.
It's nice, Michael. You don't even have to brag about yourself. Her's here to do
I
it for
know, this
you.
is great.
Uh, this is, I'm loving and I appreciate we're actually hitting some of the audience questions as we go through this as well. We are getting to our last 10 minutes, so I can't believe how fast the time has flown. And there's clearly so much more that we could dig into. I feel like we could have an entire webinar about like each kind of subtopic that we've hit on today. Where I think I'd like to start to kind of bring things around to next is, we actually did get a question and we were talking about checklists earlier, Michael, and I should clarify, I love checklists. I absolutely love them. So I am in no way trying to malign checklists. I do think there's a danger sometimes with limiting ourselves to a checklist and then stopping. And I think what you guys have hit on quite a bit is the iterative nature. That you need to start with some strategy and that's where the observability and planning ahead and kind of thinking about all of these elements, and then having then having your checklist, and then going through the checklist, and then doing it again, and that you're doing it every year or you're doing it whatever your compliance standards are, but that you're constantly revising and reiterating that. We got a question that came in that I think is a really good question, though, on the note of a checklist. Is there a checklist that someone can use to achieve zero trust compliance? And so I'm wondering if maybe we can change that a little bit to how to jump in. Herb, you kind of hit this earlier, starting with the architecture, and I think the most important thing being don't do nothing. Don't be paralyzed by this. Start somewhere. But if you were going to give some sort of clear next steps for getting started with zero trust, making sure that you're setting it up so that it can scale with you, and be effective for your industry and your organization, where do we start?
Well, so I understand the question. There are two things that I would say. And the first one is that I would say is don't build it yourself.
Mm.
And that's because it's an amazingly difficult challenge to get to a system that implements the architecture and achieves the goals of knowing who you're dealing with, not letting them escalate their privileges, not letting them move laterally across your network, and not letting them get data out and manipulating it or exploiting it. It's very hard to do. So the first thing I would say is if you can not do it yourself, that's a good place to be. And I've told that to customers who've gone off and done it themselves, and then the next year come back and say, "Could you help us? Because that had some real challenges that we didn't anticipate." But okay, so now that I've gotten that one, the thing that I would say is do start with an architecture, and Michael, I agree, you adjust it for fit, but start with an architecture. Don't try and architect it yourself when some of the best and brightest minds have published a path. So I would start there. Um, the next thing is integrate as you go. Don't focus. I would not focus just on one pillar. I would integrate as you go. Um, and the reason is that as wonderful as we try and be as tool and capability providers, sometimes one thing doesn't work with another. And you actually need to find that out sooner rather than later, as opposed to just putting a number of things into your environment and then trying to figure out what works together well. Again, my bias is that you try and implement an integrated environment up. What I have seen customers do that's been successful so that they don't disrupt their operations, their current operations, is to build it as a sidecar. Build your zero trust environment for a particular project, an AI project, a new satellite environment that is supporting, a recent acquisition. And that allows them to learn and grow, because the biggest thing that people run into is that because zero trust asks you to make architectural changes and make different decisions about how you interact within your environment, as Michael said, it's not just perimeter, it's disruptive to your current operations. And that's where people get hung up. They're like, I'm trying to do zero trust, but I also have to make sure that we ship equipment or that we serve customers. And how do I do both at the same time? It's very hard. And so, if not possible, because you're going to disrupt your operations. And so I would start it as something small in the corner, start with an architecture, integrate as you go. And, if at some point you run out of steam, don't try and build it, buy it. That's probably the way I would say.
I love
Yeah,
that.
I would tend
That's
to
awesome.
agree with that. So I think a fuller solution delivered in a targeted scope is better than the entire organizational scope, but just one tiny little piece. So I agree with that, right? Because you can't do everything all at once. And then in terms of don't do it yourself, I think a big advantage, if you accept the idea of doing it properly in a small place first, a big advantage of that is why reinvent the wheel, right? There's, organizations like Dell who have said, we've evaluated the landscape, we've chosen what we think is the best, we've integrated it, take advantage of that. Right. And those organizations can give you a first, second, and third of how to move forward with that. And if enterprises or government organizations do want to look at the broader frameworks, they are complete. But as a result of being complete, they are also complex and quite large. And so having someone to advise you along that path, I do think is essential.
Well, I've put up some next steps here, and we also have some links for everyone in the handouts tab that I mentioned, including some case studies that are really worth checking out. We've got one from Australian University, and then the Department of Defense. So that's a pretty good one to check out. So take a look at that. There's also an email address up on the screen here that you can follow up. I am going to switch things over because with our final minutes here, we're going to turn the tables on the audience, and we have a question for all of the audience members out there, which is what additional information they would like to get about about Gigamon. And I saw a few of you kind of chiming in with some questions about how this may or may not apply to your industry or your specific organization. Now, this is a great way to make sure that you can get the follow-ups that you want from Gigamon. So if you have a specific question that you want to dig into a bit further, click on the poll right now, and that way Gigamon can follow up and get you exactly the information, exactly the follow-up that's going to be most helpful for you wherever you're at in your zero trust journey. While they're doing that, Michael, if you could give us kind of one, we've learned so much from you and Herb today. There's been such a huge amount of information covered, and great analogies and just a lot that we're all taking away from this. But if you had one kind of nugget or key takeaway that you'd like everyone in the audience to be mulling over as they close out their webinar browser today, what would that be?
It would be to embrace the inspect and monitor part of zero trust as being truly a co-equal tenant with the others, which are around, update, micro perimeters, and so on. So it's make sure you never forget, right? You can't secure what you don't see, and that has to be there from the beginning.
I love that. All right. And any final calls to action? Any final steps that the audience should be doing? Email the sales email address, click on the poll to get some follow-ups. But what's the final kind of call to action for everyone here today?
Yeah, so reaching out. Go ahead, Herb.
Our first class. I would just say that remember that your warfighters and users have to be able to trust the data that they're given. And so I would just say, please don't shy away from building a zero trust environment. Don't shy away from it, because our adversary is using all the tools that we're creating for good against us, and we have to respond.
Thanks, Herb. Sorry, I was excited. I didn't realize you hadn't done the final thought. That's perfect. Yeah, but call to action, I would just say engage and learn. If you want to jump into the value of this visibility layer, engage with Gigamon. If you want to look at someone who is very credible and strong at the holistic total solution, I would say engage with Dell Forge Zero and just take it from there. Personally, I think customer case studies are always the first best protocol to get a little inspired. But then reaching out to to either a focused part of the solution like Gigamon or a holistic part like Dell is a great next step, depending on where you're at in your journey.
And both of you hit on our handouts really well, because we've got those case studies. And actually, Herb, we've got a Dell white paper in the handouts tab that is looking at the intersection of AI and data in zero trust. And it's a really interesting read. So I'm hoping everyone has clicked on that and downloaded that to save after we close out here. Well, I hate to say it, my friends, but we are right at the end of time. And I know that there were a lot of audience questions that we didn't get to. We tried to kind of sneak them in as we were going through our conversation. If we didn't get to your question, don't worry, because we're going to send all of these questions over to the Gigamon and Dell team, so you will get responses back. So stay tuned for that. And if you still have that last burning question, there's time to get it in. Get it in right now, and we'll make sure that that gets sent to the team and you'll get some answers. Michael and Herb, I want to thank both of you so much for joining in this conversation today. This has been such a blast for me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, appreciate your time and guidance and leading us through the conversation. Happy to have been a part of it.
Well, thanks, guys, and my absolute pleasure. I have to say, and I said this at the top, it's my favorite style of conversation when I get to just kick back and interact with speakers and kind of see where the conversation takes us and what are they interested in, what are they excited about. And I think today we really got to go on a pretty wide journey through zero trust and what's important, why are we talking about this now, what should you be considering? And then I love when we kind of start with the philosophy and bring it into the hard action steps. And I think that there were some really great takeaways and ways to actually start feeling like you can implement some of these ideas into your organization, as well as some great analogies to help you make these arguments to your team members when you're carrying them forward as we leave the webinar. Again, I want to thank you, everyone who asked a question. Saeed, thanks very much. Saeed's throwing a high five out there. Keep those goodwill things coming. I love that. Saeed says this is going to help us make proper decisions. That really speaks right to my heart, Saeed. That's why we're here. It's to help get you the information that you need so that you can take that into your organization and make the decisions that you need to, especially this time of year, right? This is when we're thinking about it, is making those changes, doing those iterations, and kind of moving things forward into the new year, rapidly approaching new year, I know. Well, a big thank you to everyone who's been asking questions. Don't forget about the handouts tab. Don't forget to click on the poll. And I am going to give our last little bit of excitement here. We have a prize giveaway. So again, this is a $250 Amazon gift card going to someone who is here live and present at the webinar and probably a little lucky. Our special winner today is Luna Kira from California. Luna Kira from California. Congratulations to you, Luna. You have won a $250 Amazon gift card, and we will follow up with you after we wrap. So stay tuned for that. Well, with that, I hate to wrap things up, but we're going to have to leave it there. On behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to once again thank Gigamon and Dell for making this webinar possible, especially to our incredible speakers, Michael and Herb. You've given us so much to think about today. It's not easy to come in and just kind of throw the script away and have a conversation. And I appreciate that our speakers were willing to take that journey, and not just willing, but excited. And I think they brought a lot of passion to our conversation today. And I do also want to say a big thank you to everyone who asked some really wonderful questions and brought the entire energy of the conversation up along with you. I could feel all of you here with us on the edge of your seat as I was, as we kind of walked through Zero Trust start to finish. So obviously lots more to cover, lots more conversation to have. I hope that you all follow up with Gigamon and Dell and continue to ask those questions and continue to get involved and see how you can bring some of these principles into your organization. Well, with that, I'll leave it there. I've had so much fun chatting with you all today. I hope that I get to see you all at a webinar again soon. And until then, have an absolutely beautiful end to your day. Thanks all.